Well, ladies and gentlemen, ESPN has released their college football FPI, Football Power Index. They did that about a month ago. I did a reaction to the initial rankings. We've had the AP preseason poll come out. We've got some other playoff odds that I've gone over, but let's go over the official college football playoff odds in terms of percentage. And this year it's going to be a lot different than previous years. Previous years, a lot more boring. There's only like 10, 12 teams that possibly might make the playoff, and then maybe a Cinderella with a 4-team playoff. But now that it's a 12-team playoff, you can see when it comes to these odds, there are a lot of teams that do have at least 5% chance, 2% chance, all the way down. A lot of those teams, group of 5, very low chance, but it is still interesting. When it comes to the teams that are almost guaranteed to make the playoff, I would disagree with these rankings personally. Certainly Georgia and Oregon, I think things would have to fall off the table completely somehow for either of them to miss the playoff. Georgia at around an 80% chance with Carson Beck returning, the phenomenal defense they always have with the recruiting. You do have Oregon sitting at 76% chance. Oregon will be hosting Ohio State. Oregon with Dylan Gabriel, I think he's a very underrated quarterback. He's got a ton of experience transferring in there. I think Ohio State's basically a lock as well with Will Howard. Maybe not the greatest of QBs, but they've got so much talent. I would put Ohio State over Texas. I'm not sure Texas is a complete lock. I know they returned Quinn Ewers. They were really good last year, but joining the SEC, I'm not convinced they're a total lock. I would say right now, and again, if there's crazy injuries, it's something could happen, but Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon would be my 3 locks right now to make the playoff. And when you look at some of these other teams on the list, you can see Ohio State's at 67%, Texas almost 68%, Oregon all the way up at 76%. Some of that is Oregon being likes more than both Ohio State and Texas, and also with Oregon maybe having a slightly easier schedule than those schools. And then you also do have Notre Dame, believe it or not, the next team on the list, the independent Notre Dame at a 59% chance. That lends to the idea that Notre Dame has an easy schedule this year. And you would think if Notre Dame goes 10-2, that's the advantage of not having to play in your conference championship. Let's say you're 10-2, you play in your conference championship and lose, then you're on the fringe at 10-3. Notre Dame could finish the regular season 10-2, basically be guaranteed to be in the playoff and not have to worry about losing a conference championship game, and also get an extra bye week, which is going to help them. And that's another thing that's got to be taken into account when it comes to where you rank Notre Dame. They're going to get a virtual undeserved bye week. Let's say Ohio State and Oregon have to play each other in the Big Ten Championship. Notre Dame's sitting at home because they're not in a conference. Do you think of moving Notre Dame down and making them go on the road in round 1 in the on-campus game because they've got kind of that unfair advantage to where they're the only independent and they're not going to have to play in that championship game like Oregon probably is, like possibly Texas is, Georgia, Ohio State, programs like that, maybe in Alabama. That'll be interesting to see how they weigh that. I know everyone said, well, Notre Dame, it's a very bad system for them because they can't get a first-round bye, and that is true. The top 4 teams are all going to be conference champions, but they could be number 5. If they go 12-0, they're pretty much guaranteed to be number 5, where they get a home game against very likely the number 12 seed, which would be a group of 5 team, and they would also have the extra rest as well. You do also have Penn State. How about Penn State in front of Alabama? Penn State will be hosting Ohio State this year. Huge game for them. I want to say that's a 3:30 game, so pretty cool to see Ohio State, Penn State playing in mid-afternoon game. Normally, Ohio State always faces Penn State like late October, so I think that's when that game is. So that'll be a fun game. I don't think it's going to be the whiteout game. They might have already announced Penn State's whiteout game is against maybe USC or maybe someone worse than that. I'm not sure, but that's going to be a huge game for them. And Penn State, they're a program, they've never made the 4-team playoff, but they've always been ranked consistently within like number 6 through number 12 range during the James Franklin era after the sanctions, and they were able to rebuild. So Penn State, it would not surprise me at all if they also made the playoff. You do have them there as well. Then you do have Alabama sitting at around a 57% chance with Jalen Milroe. We'll see. People are kind of wary on Bama right now, losing Nick Saban, but they've got a really talented roster. They did lose a few players to the portal, not nearly as many as people thought, and they've got Milroe returning. He's your typical great college quarterback. He can throw, he can run, he's got experience now. So we will see. Missouri, wow, that's a huge drop. So Bama was at 57% chance to make the playoffs. So there's your teams. That is, how many teams is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams with above 57% chance to make the playoff right here. And those are the 7 teams. And then after that, it drops significantly. 37% chance for Missouri. Missouri returning Brady Cook, returning Luther Burden. They do have a very easy schedule for being in the SEC. So we'll see with Missouri. There's a lot of hype surrounding that program. I will say that when a team like Missouri, who's normally never ranked inside the top 15, when they get ranked there, those teams tend to disappoint when they've got really high expectations, but we'll see. You do also have Tennessee, always have a great offense. We will see with Nico Lamaliva, the young superstar quarterback, former number 2 overall recruit, I want to say, with around a 37. Well, that's surprising that Tennessee is that high in terms of percent chances. They do like Tennessee, the FPI does. Normally the FPI does like SEC teams because they do take into account roster talent, and that's recruiting, and the SEC always dominates in terms of just pure roster talent with recruiting. You do have Oklahoma sitting with around a 36% chance. Once again, the FPI loves Oklahoma. Number 8. And you compare that to like their preseason ranking of like 15 or 16 or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but Oklahoma going to the SEC, it'll be interesting to see when it comes to them. Jackson Arnold, the young 5-star quarterback, going to be starting there. Florida State, is this the first team from the ACC? Wow. So Florida State, the first team from the ACC with a 36% chance. I've seen their week 0 game against Georgia Tech. That line is dropping. They were 14.5-point favorites. The last time I saw it, they were 11.5-point favorites. So that's interesting when it comes to Florida State. Michigan at around a 28% chance, so a big drop-off from Florida State to Michigan. How about Michigan, the defending national champions? Basically a 1-in-4 chance to make the playoff. I agree with that, or maybe I would say a little bit higher. I see Michigan as around a 9-3 team, but we will have to see. There's a lot of unknowns. The quarterback, they could be 8-4, they could be 7-5, just because the quarterback situation seems potentially dire there. And I am very surprised they were not extremely aggressive in trying to get a top quarterback. Like, imagine if they got Cam Ward or something. I'm just very shocked. I know Michigan fans are trying to buy in to their quarterback battle and what's going on there, but that seems like it could be a mistake. Kind of reminds me of like Ohio State sitting on their hands last year with McCord. If you look at a quarterback and he's not good enough, you need to be aggressive immediately and just say, we got to get a new QB. This is just the way it is. It's like free agency. If there's a top QB, that's the most important position. You got to go get him. You do have. That's why I'm surprised Ohio State didn't drop a huge amount of money on a Dylan Gabriel. And apparently Ohio State was in the Dylan Gabriel sweepstakes. He talked about it, but then he just chose Oregon. You do also have Clemson, the other ACC team. Clemson always with a really good defense. Cade Klubnik, he has experience now. We'll see if he can put it all together. I think Clemson's a little bit underrated. People are tired of talking about them. Seems like their dynasty is over. There's the narrative now with Dabo Swinney not taking in transfer portal kids, and it just seems like people really don't like Clemson anymore. But they always do have a good defense, and they've got really good roster talent, so we'll see. LSU, a mixed bag. Losing a lot. Maybe their defense gets improved. They're very talented, but it's a mixed bag with LSU for sure, just because they're losing, I think, their top 2 receivers, and also Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner. Kansas, I think Kansas is a big dark horse to make the playoff. I don't know if they win the Big 12. I do think the Big 12 can get 2 teams in. It's going to be hard, though. It is going to be hard for the Big 12 to get 2 teams in, just because that conference is going to cannibalize itself. And it's a very average conference, which is both good and bad, because the bottom is pretty strong, but the top is not strong at all. The bottom is strong for being like, bottom tier. It's just all very average. It's all condensed together. So Kansas and Kansas State basically with around 20%, 24% chance. I do think Kansas has the best offense in the Big 12. Devin Neal. And so we will see when it comes to them. Unfortunately, they're not playing at their home stadium. That's going to be a little bit tough in terms of the environment, playing at Arrowhead for most of their big conference games. Kansas State losing Will Howard. They've got the young QB now. The Big 12 is a mixed bag. I think obviously the Big 12 is going to get 1 team in, whoever wins the conference championship. And then maybe if another team is like 11-2, like, let's say Kansas is 11-1 entering the Big 12 championship. They lose and they're 11-2. I could see them getting in over a 10-2 Notre Dame, just because, Notre Dame didn't play in their conference championship. It's kind of unfair. Kansas plays and loses, and then they're 11-2. So I could see something like that happening, but they would need two teams to have minimal losses. Otherwise, if you have 3 losses in the Big 12, I don't think you have any chance of making the playoff. There's going to be too many Big 10 and SEC teams, and also maybe 2 ACC teams, depending. A&M out of the SEC, I don't think A&M is making the playoff. They're just trying to improve this year. 8-4, maybe 9-3 would be great for them in the SEC. They've got the huge Week 1 home game against Notre Dame. They're 1.5-point favorites. I recently saw that line, so they are favorites in that game. That's the big 7 o'clock Week 1 game, so that'll be big for both teams. Ole Miss, how about Ole Miss, how low they are in this at 20%? There were people that were ranking Ole Miss inside of their top 5 in the preseason polls, and here the FPI has them at 16, but they are pretty significantly far down in terms of playoff chances. Some of that's due to schedule. Some of that's also due to maybe the FPI thinking Ole Miss is a little bit overrated. There's a narrative that they're going to have this great defense now because they got some transfer portal guys. They returned Jackson Dart. They lost Judkins kind of out of nowhere. But Ole Miss they're another team that's kind of a mixed bag. We'll see with them. They should be good this year. I mean, they're going to have a very high ranking early on, so we will see. You do have Louisville out of the ACC. I'm not high on Louisville this year. They've got around an 18% chance. Miami as well out of the ACC. A lot of people high on Miami with what they did, what they've done, the amount of money they've invested into this team. They could certainly make the playoff, and I would imagine people are projecting Miami to make the playoff. Maybe both Miami and FSU. Maybe possibly only Miami, but because it's the 12-team playoff now, it would not surprise me at all. It would be kind of funny if Miami was like ranked 11th, and imagine Penn State is 6th, and Miami has to go to Penn State. It's like 20 degrees out. I think that'd be very hard for Miami, but they are an interesting team that possibly has a star quarterback now via the portal, so we'll see. SMU, people probably surprised, how is SMU this high? They were just a group of 5 team. Now they're in the ACC. They have a very easy schedule, even being in the ACC. They returned Preston Stone, their quarterback that, they had a really good season last year. Now it was group of 5, but I could still see SMU making the playoff. That would be a bold prediction there if you predicted that. Boise State is the first group of 5 team, so they think Boise State has the best chance out of all group of 5 teams to get that auto bid and very likely be ranked number 12, which is where we expect the group of 5 team to be seated. Arizona out of the Big 12. The Big 12 is just going to be, it's a mosh pit. We don't know. Noah Fafita, they were able to keep him. They've also got a really good receiver. Arizona is an interesting team to watch. They finished last year really strong, even though they lost their coach. You do have UTSA out of the American. So I'm not really high on UTSA personally, but this is just a potential team that, being group of 5, they could make it. They could be the one group of 5 team to make it with the auto bid. NC State out of the ACC. NC State is kind of under the radar right now. They were barely inside of the top 25. They'll be interesting to watch. Auburn, I think, has no chance. I don't know how they have a 13% chance. They are recruiting very well. They're recruiting the state of Alabama very well. So I think Auburn's going to be better as the years progress. And I honestly think Auburn's probably looking at the next expansion when the playoff expands from 12 to 14. Because the SEC, it's so strong, you need those extra 2 spots if you are Auburn and you're trying to build and get program momentum to be able to maybe lose 3 games and have that runway. And by the way, with the 14-team playoff, imagine a team losing 4 games and getting in. I don't know if that's probably not going to happen, but it is interesting to think about. USC always has a good offense. We'll see how good their defense is. It's going to be a lot harder, though, joining the Big Ten. You do have Oklahoma State. So look at all of these Big 12 teams. How about how low Utah is? They do not like Utah, the FPI. They've got Utah outside of the top 25, and you can see the playoff chances around a 12% chance. Texas Tech is basically tied with Utah. TCU is basically tied. Oregon State, they are still listed with the Pac-12 technically because the Pac-12 is still alive. But the reason Oregon State is this high, now I'm not even sure Oregon State can make the playoff. So I would imagine they can't make it via group. No, they can't make it via group of 5 auto bid. They would have to probably go undefeated or go like 11-1. But even if they go 11-1, their schedule is going to be ridiculously easy. But they do face Oregon. I know they face Oregon early in the season. If they somehow beat Oregon and then go 11-1, because they're going to be mainly facing Mountain West teams, maybe. But they're technically not part of group of 5 as far as I know. UCF, I like UCF personally. Their stadium, I just like their program, but I don't think they're going to make the playoff. Liberty, absurdly easy schedule. Like, look at Liberty's ranked 79th. All these other teams are in the 30s. The reason they're this high in terms of the playoff is because their schedule, again, just like last year, is the easiest out of all FBS teams. You do have Florida. So, I mean, Florida's ranked 20th in terms of FPI. How are they this low? Because they have a brutal schedule, by far the hardest schedule, and they have a big week 1 game and an actual legit chance against Miami, where it's basically a pick'em. That game's at home. That's a 3:30 game. Miami against Florida. So that's a great rivalry game. You do have North Carolina. I don't think North Carolina is going to do anything. They lose Sam Howell. I mean, they have been recruiting the state of North Carolina really well. Memphis is there. They're another potential group of 5 team. Iowa, I would be shocked if they made it. I think a good season for them would be 8-4. App State, they're another group of 5 team. West Virginia, possibly this year. It feels like West Virginia is a lot better in terms of computer models this year than they have been in the past few years. And they start with a huge game against Penn State at home. And that's a game where you can kind of catch Penn State off guard. There's going to be a raucous crowd. It's a noon start time. It's game 1. So that could be a really big advantage for West Virginia. Penn State maybe working out some kinks. I think Penn State will pull away in that game, but we'll see. Tulane, you do also, I mean, look at all these teams. They've got like around a 6% chance. Washington, I think Washington has no chance. Fresno State, another group of 5 team. Colorado, they have Colorado ranked 36th. I don't know, man. I think I'm with a lot of other people where Colorado, they've got decent talent. But I just don't think in the Big 12, I think they're probably a 7-5 team, honestly. Rutgers, Rutgers is improving. They've definitely had a big improvement over the last 3 or 4 years, especially their defense. Cal is kind of an underrated team. We'll see how they do now in the ACC. You do have Troy, Nebraska with an easier schedule. We'll have to see how they do. Kentucky, all these teams are on 4%. Maryland, I mean, these teams have such small chances. If I had to say anyone in here that has a chance kind of as an underdog, probably Virginia Tech, just because of how easy the schedule is. Like Virginia Tech, you could make an argument they could start 8-0. Now, certainly they could start 5-3 just because their program hasn't been that good. But just with the situation, their dual threat QB that they returned, and also just easy games in the ACC, they've got like a big Week 9 game against Clemson. But other than that, they have a very manageable schedule. And then you can see just a bunch of other teams. I'm not going to go through all these teams. I want to see the lowest team on here. Nevada has a 0.1% chance. Florida International. I remember when Florida International was the worst team. Well, Akron at one point, I remember, was the worst team by far. And maybe they still are because this isn't ranked via that. But either way, that's just me going through all of these teams in terms of their chances to make the playoff. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.